thought Jessie Lott had a bad cold until her liver began to fail. She went into a coma, her brain pressure reached 100, and her heart stopped. For 20 minutes, she was gone. And then, she came back. An ordinary emergency, really. Except for one thing.
When my heart stopped, I just suddenly saw my grandma, and she passed away like a year ago.
What did she look like?
Well, she had like a white robe on, and she looked exactly how she did before she died.
I've interviewed dozens and dozens and dozens of children who have had these experiences.
Pediatrician Dr. Melvin Morse of the Seattle Children's Hospital has conducted by far the most in-depth research into children's near-death experiences. His documentation includes extensive on-camera interviews with children, such as Jessie Lott.
And what did you think about that, your grandma being there?
I was just so shocked. I didn't, I don't know. Just like she was right there, and I was right here, and I can't move. She was just sitting there. It's like she was frozen. I don't know. I was sort of scared, but sort of happy to see her. That's all I remember. That she was sitting in a chair. She was sitting frozen, and she was fine. I don't know where I went, but I went somewhere.
She's just a kid. A kid with no axe to grind, no knowledge of the concept of the near-death experience. In her case, hardly any religion in her upbringing at all. Just a kid who remembers what she experienced. Hers is just one of the stories Tom Harper, Rhodes Scholar, theologian, and journalist, encountered when he was researching his bestseller, Life After Death.
Just a kid. But to children, and particularly those who have had no special indoctrination in religious ideas, have something unique to tell us about what happens after death. Are their experiences different? Or do they have the same experiences as adults, but see them differently? Are they better reporters because of their lack of sophistication? In this program, we will look at many examples of children's testimony.
Children have simple and pure experiences. They use words like neat or weird, which, are very, very real feelings that, the typical child's near-death experience, they go, wow, I thought I was floating out of my body. And I knew I was dead, but I was still alive. And there's a genuine quality of mystery about it. How could such a thing be really happening to them? They're often frightened by the experience. Many of them wonder how they're going to get back in their body. Since it's so far out of the realm of anything they expected, they frequently say it was scary. That's not an unusual experience at all. And mostly I'm impressed by how fragmentary the experiences are. They usually just tell a teeny little fragment of something that has clearly struck them.
Because the huge noodle was just like a tunnel. It went straight, and it didn't have anything in your way. It wasn't like a spiral noodle, so it's either a tunnel or a noodle, and it was the rainbow.
A horrendous crash on a snowy mountain bridge plunged 3-year-old Chris Eggleston into a freezing lake.
Was that scary?
Yeah, and our mom yelled to take our seatbelts off. But when we crashed, behind us was a car with 6 children in it. He was the first man to save my life. He saw us go around the curve, but when he came around the curve, he didn't see us anymore. So he took his flashlight and looked down off the bridge, and he could see us, could see our car. So he had to dive like 5 or 6 times to get down far enough to get to it. And during all that time, I was having a near-death experience.
Chris Eggleston had, again, a typical child's near-death experience, in the sense that it's brief, fragmentary, difficult to comprehend, both for us and for him.
I started falling through this noodle. It was coming closer and closer. And I went inside it, and it was all like a rainbow. And then at the end there was a wall with smaller, just 2 smaller tunnels that would lead to like an animal heaven or human.
And he was in a car which filled up with water, and he nearly drowned. He said suddenly everything went blank. He was then out of his body, surprised to be there, felt that eventually he could learn to swim or somehow move himself in the air. Said that he went to a place that he called the human heaven and made some sort of choice to return to his body. But interestingly enough, he says that he was in a huge noodle until he realized that noodles don't have rainbows in them, so it must have been some sort of tunnel.
Children's experiences have the common features of tunnels, lights, out-of-body experiences, all of which I think we can understand in brain terms. What they don't have is elaborated visions of the kind that adults have. They do not have long life reviews, that they haven't had a long life. Quite often they see living people as well as dead ones. They see their pets, they see the people who matter to them in a different way from adults. We also mustn't forget that many children, particularly in America where most of these stories come from, are exposed to a lot of religious propaganda early in their life. They hear about heaven and hell and pearly gates and angels and so on. And in fact, some of the angels children report are classic sort of painted angels that you might get in a religious shop, wings and halos and the whole works. So I think a lot of the details come from children's expectations, just as they do with adults.
And then I didn't know which was which, so I started floating down towards the animal one. Then I ran into this humongous flower. And then inside I found a honeybee that was like as big as I was now. It's like and I knew he liked me because he gave me some bread.
His parents had no religious beliefs whatsoever. He doesn't encounter something that he thought was God. His heaven is a very commonplace description of heaven in that it was a golden castle with pearly gates, the kind of thing that I think virtually every child is exposed to. He says he had a bumblebee as a helper that assisted him with the experience. In other words, I think a more religious child typically describes guardian angels as assisting them with the experience. In his case, it was a bumblebee, a very non-religious image in keeping with his very non-religious background. The one message I've learned from children's near-death experiences is that we die the life we live.
So, it seems we die the life we live. The same images that are comforting to you in life are comforting in death.
How did that make you feel?
I was sort of scared, but sort of happy to see her.
You were happy to see her. And then what happened?
One of the most interesting things about watching the interview with Jessie Lott is the fragmentary nature of her experience. She's obviously struggling with something very profound that's happened to her, and yet she herself doesn't understand it. She has a long memory gap to the very moment her heart stopped beating. And that's when she had the image that her grandmother was sitting there at the bedside. I was just so shocked to see her. She has the sensation she went somewhere else, and then she was back. And then following this tiny little memory, which is localized to the point of her near death, she then has another long memory gap. She doesn't tell us a coherent story. She doesn't fill in every memory gap. She doesn't have a logical or rational explanation for the puzzling things that happened to her. Instead, she simply tells us what she saw and how profoundly affected she was by it.
I think it's fair to say that children identify more with natural phenomena than adults do. Where, for example, an adult might typically see religious symbols during a near-death experience, children very frequently encounter animals. Chris Eggleston's honeybee, for example. In addition, children themselves are often identified with small creatures, such as the monarch butterfly in the following story. The monarch is an ancient symbol for early death, probably because its metamorphoses can be seen as symbolic transitions to another life. But here's a man for whom the symbol became real.
My daughter's computer name was Panda, and she would get on the computer and communicate with friends. And so even before she died, one of my head covers in golf was a panda. And so I'd always think of Jenny when I played golf and would take that cover off. The first monarch experience for me was a Sunday afternoon in August, and beautiful in Omaha, and gathered my 3-wood out in the fairway, and the head cover was the panda, thinking about Jenny, and looked down to my ball, and there's a monarch sitting on the ball. And that monarch just sat there, and I said, there's no way I'm going to hit that ball.
Fine, get out there. Get out there.
So after several minutes, finally the monarch very gently and kind of spiraled up and went away, and I felt very warm about it, told my wife, and within a couple of weeks some more began to happen. I was talking to a new next-door neighbor, and he asked me, how many children do you have? And I'm always reluctant, do I say 3, including Jenny, or 2, just the living? And I said 3. And so he asked me questions. He says, I know a little bit about that and what happened. So I told him, and then I began to relate the butterfly stories, 3 of which had already happened at that point.
Take my hat off, and I'm shushing it away. Thing just doesn't want to go away. And
as I'm talking about Jenny, as I'm talking about deathbed visions, and so on, a monarch comes, and there's a twig there, and sits there. And he's doing this double take, looking at me and looking at the monarch, and it sits there what seems like 6 to 7 minutes. And so for me, I don't know what they prove or whatever, other than I take them for what they are, and that somehow my daughter is still in my life.
Somehow, his daughter is still in his life. But in what sense? Is she in some way present in the butterfly? Or do we really mean in his memory? Does this have something to teach us about what happens after death? Certainly many parents think so, and then there are the students and the researchers in the field of children and dying who frequently encounter stories of deceased children who come back to help their loved ones.
I interviewed a man who had a little girl who had spent 18 months dying of neuroblastoma, and she'd gone through multiple remissions.
How was your day?
Okay.
Did anybody come to visit?
No.
No? Can I get you anything?
No. Dad?
Yeah?
No, I've saved
One day,
3 times.
she and her father were talking, and she was very concerned about what was going to happen. And she said, Daddy, do you know why I've got better 3 times? He said, no, honey, why? She said, because I have to prepare you for my death. And when I feel you're ready, then I'll die. And the day she died, she put her arms around her daddy's neck and said, Daddy, you got to promise you won't do anything to hurt yourself. And he promised. But yet the pain and the anguish so great. 3 days later, he was seriously thinking of killing himself. But he heard her distinctly say,
Daddy, remember, you promised.
And he said, even though the pain was bad after that, I never seriously contemplated committing suicide again.
A hallucination? Maybe. But when people die, there's always an inexplicable aura around them, and never is that phenomenon more deeply felt than when a child dies. The feeling may come from the child, but it encompasses all the people close at hand. There's no end of credible anecdotal evidence to this effect. But Emily Dickinson puts it as clearly as anyone ever has.
The last night that she lived, it was a common night, except the dying. This to us made nature different. We noticed smallest things, things o'erlooked before, by this great light upon our minds, italicized, as 'twere.
You know, something that Dr. Morse has learned from his research is that children don't see death as something to be feared.
I'm curious, one child said to me, I'm not afraid to die anymore. What's the message that people who've had these experiences, that they tell us again and again? I'm no longer afraid to die.
Sometimes children carry their indifference to death to extremes, appearing notoriously casual, not to say callous about the whole idea. After all, they can't really conceive of its meaning, and certainly not to its happening to them.
Miss Lucy had a baby, she named it Tiny Tim. She put it in the bathtub to see if it could swim. It drank up all the water, it ate up all the soap. It died the very next morning with bubbles in its throat. Miss Lucy had a baby, she named it Tiny Tim. Put it in the bathtub to see if it could swim. It drank up all the water, it ate up all the soap. Tried to use the bathtub, but it wouldn't go down slow. Miss Lucy had a baby.
But children not only have near-death experiences, they die too. And there's plenty of evidence that they tend to approach their deaths differently than adults. They are often less frightened and more concerned with the effects on their loved ones. Tanya Caruana had been battling leukemia for close to 3 years when her parents had to break the news to her that she wasn't going to get any better.
When her cancer did come back, it was devastating. And that to think that your child is going to die and you're never going to see that child again. Tanya became very quiet, very withdrawn at that point. I knew that I couldn't wait any longer, that I had to confirm to her that yes, there's nothing more that could be done. And that was a very difficult thing as a mother to do, to look your 13-year-old child in the face and tell them there's nothing more that can be done for them. Shortly afterwards, I went down to take a break and have a really good cry for myself. And when I came back up, she wasn't in her room. And I found her in a little 5-year-old boy's room, telling him how important it is that he takes his medication, because he was having a lot of problems taking his medication. And I thought, here's this child that just found out that she's dying, and here she is trying to help somebody else.
When children are dying of an illness, it's a devastating event for parents, obviously, and siblings. But if the parent can make themselves receptive to the child really truly sharing their experience, rather than continue to be rooted in the physical losses and changes, and that's a very hard thing to do. Anticipating the loss of a child it's one of life's most devastating things. But you have this little child, this little spirit that is having some very wonderful experiences.
She was very weak, and you could see her just trying to lift her arms. And at first, we couldn't figure out what she was trying to do. And then we realized through her whispers that she was trying to hug us. So we both took an arm. My husband took an arm, and I took on an arm, and I was laying on the bed beside her. And I put my other arm around her, and I was just holding her. And she kept saying over and over again, "I love you, I love you." She knew that her time had come.
If the parents can be more receptive to where the child truly is, not so much where the child's body is, it's a big distinction, they will get some very comforting messages that this child is not alone, this child is going on a wonderful adventure, this child is not afraid, this child is not suffering. These are all things that will give them tremendous grief assistance in the journey that they have up ahead. A tremendous amount of peace.
Actually, the 10 minutes before she was dying, at the very end, her breaths got quieter and quieter, and she stopped breathing. And at that point, I started crying, and she started breathing again. It was like she was trying to make herself go on for my sake. And I told her, I said, no, Tanya, no, it's okay, it's okay. And at that point, she stopped breathing, and then that was it for her.
Tanya's love for her family and her lack of fear in the face of her impending death taught everyone around her a profound lesson in courage. The stories of children who have had near-death experiences and what those who were close to children who have died tell us confirms to me my sense that they're nearer to the womb of creation. And perhaps, in some sense, they're privy to a clearer and purer perception of what's happening to them. As Maggie Callanan tells us, if we can get beyond the grief and the pain we feel as a child close to us is dying, we might hear them telling us something very important about the journey they see ahead, that it's an adventure, that they're not afraid, and that we shouldn't be either.